So you may or may not be aware that I am somewhat of a Moviebob fan, though he is certainly no fan of mine. A while ago he posted that he'd be selling overstock of his long out-of-print book, Super Mario Bros. 3 Brick by Brick. Being the world's biggest Moviebob superfan, there was simply no hesitation on my part. I bought a copy instantly. And good for me, because people who got in early were rewarded with a copy that has Bob's autograph. Here, take a look. Even if Bob had nothing to do with this book, it would be somewhat of an oddity. Several mentions are made therein about the intent being to create a Let's Play in text form. As such, the 200 or so page book is structured with about 60 pages of introductory information, followed by about 140 pages of Bob describing each and every level of Super Mario Bros. 3 in varying degrees of detail. Upon opening the book, you'll note that there are several dedications, mostly Bob's family. However, towering above the rest is none other than Super Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto.
What's that? Sorry, Chief, I can't hear you with Miyamoto's balls all up in your mouth.
The text opens with a very broad description of the history of the entire Mario franchise. It reads something like a Wikipedia page, and for someone who's already familiar with the history of the series, it's a bit of a slog. However, this section of the book is followed by what one could consider the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. Chapter 2, Mario and Me, is the part of the book that the true Bobologists like myself are here for. It's about 40 pages of pure, unfiltered Moviebob going into great detail about his life. Most of the memes surrounding this book, like the instance in which he compares the console wars to his own personal Vietnam, come from here. A rather bizarre bit that I've never heard outside of reading the book myself is the bit where he compares the cultural significance of the unveiling of Super Mario Bros. 3 via the film The Wizard to 9/11.
So I give you Super Mario Brothers 3!
Not to mention us, poor bastards, who had to march into that nightmare, and if we were lucky, to come out again, shells of what we used to be.
We were all part of it in our own way.
You were in Virginia!
The part of the book immediately following the autobiography is, no joke, just a straight list of every enemy, character, and item in the game, with a few sentences describing each of them. This is probably the part that will filter the average failed human, but I, Bob's strongest soldier, persevered. The main playthrough is considerably less dull than the previous chapter of the book, but that's not due to the actual content of the game. Bob's multi-paragraph descriptions of each and every level in the game are occasionally broken up with italicized interludes, in which Bob explains what was going on in his personal life at the time of his writing, with some interesting insights into the Overthinker-verse. I took a few notes. Bob frequently mentions doing cardio routines that burn calories in the thousands. This is the only part of the book that I frankly refuse to believe. Most of Bob's time playing the game for the book is done in the very early hours of the morning, around 2 to 3 a.m., and he's usually drinking alcohol while doing so. This can be corroborated if you've actually watched the game Overthinker, because alcohol can be seen and is referenced several times in the series. His early morning play sessions also tie into his video production, as Bob mentions that he did most of the work on his earliest content in the wee hours of the morning, when the rest of the family was asleep. His reasoning for this being that this was the only time he could use the family computer without interruption. This seems plausible, as many of the interior shots of his home in the earlier game Overthinker videos are clearly shot at night. Bob's grandmother's poor health is frequently mentioned, and ultimately she passes away during the months when he's writing the playthrough. He doesn't attend the post-funeral reception, as he says he doesn't know how to act in such situations, referring to it as emotional cowardice, and uses replacing the family's air conditioner as an excuse for his lack of attendance. In the tail end of the book, Bob winds up rear-ending someone's car, but we don't really hear any more about it, other than that it's a friend of the family, so he's not too concerned about the legal ramifications. As far as the actual playthrough goes, there is very little of note, but I should mention a few things. Bob hates World 6, and explicitly calls World 6-4 cheap, and mentions that he usually skips this section of the game entirely. He also mentions wanting to beat Bowser with a Hammer Bros suit, but ultimately fails to do so. The book itself also has a myriad of strange typos. Sentences are repeated several lines where there's no spacing between any letters or words, and Bob consistently misspells the word canon. referring to the armament, not the fictional universe.
I am really not that good at my job.
The text is also extremely densely packed on the page, leading to the book's length of about 200 pages to feel much longer. The closest comparison I can think of is the mass-market paperback of Atlas Shrugged, which I'm sure he would be pleased to hear. So ultimately, was Brick by Brick worth reading? Well, as someone who's fascinated by Bob and his content, yes. For the casual Bob-server, maybe not. Outside those first 50-ish pages, it's a fairly tedious read. The bits of Bob lore found spread throughout the playthrough, which is the bulk of the text, are enough to keep a more dedicated overthinker hooked, but the typical failed human mayonnaise ghoul might not have the necessary 3-digit IQ to comprehend a text of such intellectual density.
The sacred Jedi texts. Ooh, read them, have you? Well, page turners, they were not.
Now, all that said, the book is still available on eBay. So if you do have any interest in reading it, you can get it right now, and I will put a link to it in the description. So what do you think? Have you read this book? Do you want to read this book? Let me know in the comments. See you next time.